Alrighty, good evening, everybody. My name is Daniel Baer, and I'm an event facilitator here with McNally Robinson Booksellers. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Ninawac, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. And we, of course, are gathered here tonight to celebrate the Winnipeg launch of The Fulcrum, a sweeping climate thriller from Michael Decter, in which an economist and a public servant join forces and hearts to navigate the dangerous international conflict and imminent environmental disaster. Following the reading tonight, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if you are present today and want to ask a question, just raise your hand nice and high for me to see you. And I'll come by with this microphone just to ensure that you're heard on tonight's live stream as well. And I will be back at the end to review signing procedure. But for now, I do have the honor in introducing tonight's guest, a Harvard University graduate and tonight's author, Michael Decter. He has had careers in government, health, and investment management, a dual citizen of Canada and Ireland. He was awarded the Order of Canada in 2004 and the Queen's Jubilee Medal in 2017. Decter is the author of 9 other books, ranging from nonfiction to political stories, and The Fulcrum is his second novel. Please join me in welcoming Michael Decter.
Good. Well, I wasn't going to read, but I think maybe I should. And the reason I wasn't going to read was I was at a book reading, and one of the authors said, we should leave reading to actors, and it shook me. So but our host suggested that I might read, so I'm going to read a short bit, and then I have some things to say to put it in context. So as billed, this has been categorized by my publisher as an environmental thriller, and that's an interesting kind of space to be writing in. So this is from very early in the book. And if you had read Shadow Life, you would already know the character of Matthew Rice. And he continues in this book. So I'm supposed to say this carefully. You don't have to have read Shadow Life to appreciate The Fulcrum. It can stand on its own. But if you would like to read Shadow Life and haven't, they're happy to take an order because there are still some copies with my publisher of Shadow Life, and they would be delighted if you would purchase them. So this is, Matthew Rice is driving from Toronto to Boston, and he has stepped down as the city manager of Toronto after events in Shadow Life. And so I'll just plunge in. His phone interrupted his tortured thoughts and echoed inside the SUV. He looked at the screen. His former colleague, Gordon, who had become the Toronto city manager upon Matt's retirement. They hadn't spoken much. How are you, Gordon? Sorry not to see you recently. Gordon didn't mince words. Meteorologists are telling us there's a massive rainstorm coming to Toronto in about 72 hours. His voice was anxious. They're tracking it from the west. I'm hearing new phrases, atmospheric rivers and such. I thought it was all hypothetical. How can I help? Do you remember the study you commissioned about extreme climate? Noah's Ark, we dubbed it, Matt said. About 1.5 years ago, I remember it well. The researchers did excellent work, but one of their interns leaked part of their findings. That's the one, Gordon said. Unfortunately, Noah continued, I'd not mentioned the study to the mayor by its name, Noah's Ark, just said I was having a little work done on extreme climate events. The mayor publicly disowned it. suggested the city hadn't commissioned it in a proper fashion. Probably true. I really did piss off the political class. Remind me, what was the studies going in premise? A very simple one. We wanted to test our vulnerabilities, estimate the impact and mitigation of a few extreme climate scenarios. Matt outlined those scenarios for Gordon. Scenario 1, Toronto receives a year's worth of rain in 1 month. Scenario 2, Toronto receives a month's worth of rain in 1 week. Scenario 3, Toronto receives the highest level of weekly rain in 1 day. And scenario 4, the real shit show, Toronto receives the highest rainfall ever experienced in a day in only 1 hour. Impressive range of worst case scenarios, Gordon said. Where might I find the study if it even still exists? Are you at your desk at City Hall, Matt asked. I am, and I've got my desktop open. Mouse clicking sounds came over the line. Is it on here somewhere? Yes, search for the folder entitled Rainy Day. Gordon chuckled, hardly a disguise. Maybe, Matt said, but I needed some way to remember where I hid it. The mayor barked at us, told us to destroy all the copies. I have it. I'll read it through. Give you a call if I have questions, but before I let you go, what do you make of all of this? The coming storm, Noah's Ark, hell, climate change in general, and what we're supposed to do about all of it. Matt weighed how technical to get. He could cite peer-reviewed studies, recall dismal figures from memory, advocate for the umpteenth time the long-standing scientific consensus. He could throw numbers at Gordon, tell him that the planet was well on its way past a temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, probably even 2.5 or 3. But he opted instead for sober realism and practicality. That's what a city manager needed. Extreme weather events are a certainty, Matt said. Bottom line, forest fires and heavy rains, take them as a given. The 100-year storm, imagine it happens 3 times in the next 10 years. That's a hell of a lot gloomier than the official government line, Gordon said. I'm no longer in government, no need to soft pedal or mislead the public about what's coming. I can be honest and blunt as I like. Gordon issued a, wouldn't that be nice kind of sigh. But listen, as gloomy as it may be, Matt went on, don't fall for the existential crisis rhetoric. It's a trap. Navel gazing. Focus on risk mitigation. Start with the Noah's Ark study. It spells it out. Matt gave Gordon a highlight reel of the study, told him how in Toronto parks and golf courses could be used as holding areas for excess rainwater. It would mean moving some earth and antagonizing one hell of a lot of residents and golfers. But when the worst case happens, the work could be done quickly if the heavy equipment was staged nearby first. The clogged rivers, the Don, the Humber, the Rouge, were another thing. They'd need to clean them up, clear them of debris, throw some rocks and gravel on the paths in the ravine to keep them from deep erosion by floodwaters. As much water as possible would then route not into the city streets, but into Lake Ontario, which was big enough to take it. In any case, they could use the city's resources and equipment to prepare for the worst. Matt went on, but Gordon stopped him. I got it. Damn, lots to do. Thanks, Matt. I'll get to reading. Good luck, Gordon. Glad you're the one in charge. Matt hung up, checked his rear view, got back on the road. The new city manager would have trouble, he thought, not provoking the mayor's ire. But if Noah's Ark saved them, Gordon would have clean hands and be seen as tough and smart. He would manage the mayor and give him the credit. More important, he would get the job done. Oh, I'm going to stop there. So there's really 3 streams to this book, and let me, first acknowledge that Dr. Venkman in Ghostbusters said not to cross the streams, but I think, I'll back up. One of the readers of Shadow Life, a recent reader, wrote me and observed, a fellow named Ron House, who I only know socially, but he wrote me saying, observing that Shadow Life had 2 writers, an autobiographer and a novelist. The Fulcrum, I think, honestly, also has the same 2 writers, but the novelist is winning in this one. So there's more fiction and less autobiography. And I'm glad the novelist is winning. It gives me more freedom to write. So what are these streams? So the first is, having created Matthew and Mary Louise in Shadow Life, I wanted to send them on a new adventure. They were kind of in my mind and in my imagination. And so I wanted to keep writing and write something interesting that they could be part of. The second stream is really the whole issue of climate change. And I've had the somewhat harsh view or sad view that we wouldn't get serious about climate change until we lost a major city to an event. Now, I didn't want to write that as nonfiction because I didn't really want to pick a city and say it was going to be destroyed. So I thought if I did it fictionally, it would perhaps be easier. And if I got the city wrong or it didn't happen, I would just say, well, it's fiction. But I was motivated in part, and you sensed it in what I read, that we're very focused on trying to deal with numbers about temperature and carbon. And there's no better place to come than Manitoba to talk about mitigation. And so I do want to pivot a little bit, but first, something that really influenced me, and it was a surprise. I was sitting next to Jean Chrétien at a dinner shortly after he left being our prime minister, and we were making conversation. I said to him, Prime Minister, what did you learn about climate change during your time in office as our prime minister? And he looked at me, and Chrétien sometimes has this ability to take something very complicated and say something quite insightful. And he just looked at me and said, too many economists, not enough engineers. And that stuck with me. And it occurred to me in coming back to my hometown of Winnipeg for this launch, that having my sister Rebecca's good friend from school days, Jennifer Roblin, living down the street from me in Toronto, the daughter of our former Premier Duff Roblin, that there's a very powerful lesson in the history of this city. So 1950, the city was nearly washed away by a flood. It was not the worst flood in the city's history. I learned from an article in the Royal Geographic. Apparently in the early 1800s, there was an even bigger flood, but there were not very many people. It wasn't really a city at that point. So, but the 1950 flood was a catastrophic event. 107,000 people evacuated the city. There was only one death. And I note that recently the city has honored the person who actually died fighting the flood. And they've named a street after him, which you may all know, but I didn't. Here's the glasses. His name, let me find it here. I was surprised to find that Brian Mays, who's on the city council here, who was a good friend of my brother Richard when he was in Toronto, is the councillor that fought to have this individual honored by a street name. Yes. Lawson Og Way is the street, and Lawson Og is the 26-year-old who, after fighting in World War II, came back as a member of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles and was working in the midst of the 50 flood when a dike in Fort Garry gave way and he was swept away. I do this because it was engineering, not economics, that changed the safety level of the city of Winnipeg. And it was Premier Duff Roblin, who was elected in the mid-50s, who championed building the Red River floodway, which was derided for many years as Duff's Ditch by those who thought it was a silly project, but not so derided as the city survived flood after flood. And why I want to talk about it a little bit is that it is really the absence of major works of mitigation that worries me more than the rise in the temperature. I do think we will eventually do a number of the right things and we will slow the amount of carbon going into the atmosphere, but we're not going to do it fast enough. So what's going to happen is we're going to have more extreme weather events, be they the fires that have been raging across northern Canada or the floods, and we're heading into probably the worst hurricane season we've ever had in the southern United States, because the water in the ocean is so hot off Florida that it's an accelerant. And hurricanes, when they hit hot water, move faster. And we've seen hurricanes go from, a category 1 to a storm to a category 4 or 5 very quickly. So my hope in writing a novel about this is partly to entertain and partly to give Matthew and Mary Louise a new adventure, but it is also to try and explore what would happen if we had an extreme weather event, in the case of the book, a hurricane, and what would happen and how would we deal with it. And I think the answer generally has been we've been dealing on a crisis basis with things like fires and floods, and that we haven't been re-engineering. And I'd say there are obvious exceptions. The city of Venice, which some of you or many of you may have visited, used to flood 100 days a year in San Marco. And now, since they put 39 gates on all of the inlets, it doesn't flood very much. City of London have put gates on the Thames. Tokyo has built huge underground caverns to hold water. So there are a lot of mitigation works going on, but when you stack them up, they're not enough up against what we're facing. So the Fulcrum, and one small story, I had a very good publisher, and we got on very well on everything but quotes, and they were very picky about copyright. And I had a significant battle. You will find in the front of the book a quote that the quote on which the name was based of the book, so I didn't want to give it up. And the quote is from Archimedes of Syracuse, a couple hundred years BC, who said, and he said it in Greek, but it was eventually translated in the 19th century into English: "Give me a fulcrum and I will move the world," which John Fitzgerald Kennedy quoted from in his speech urging the US Peace Corps to be formed. But I do like the idea of a fulcrum and the idea that one can move the world or change the world with that. And the book really dives into the question of what kind of a fulcrum that would be, and explores it in a real life kind of crisis setting. I think that's the main points that I want to make. I guess I'd say this: I'm ultimately optimistic that we're going to, as a species, survive this, but I think it's going to be, it's not going to be easy. And if you look at how long it took Premier Roblin and Prime Minister Diefenbaker and people of Manitoba to come to terms with this, very real threat to the city, and the desire of nature in some ways to rebuild Lake Agassiz in southern Manitoba. It takes a long time and a great deal of effort. And as Jean Chrétien said, more engineers and probably fewer economists. And it worries me as an economist that we've tried to change behavior by taxing carbon, by putting subsidies on electric vehicles. I'm not against any of those things, but if you don't have an engineering solution, then you don't get the fulcrum, you don't get the change that you need and the technology that you need. So it seems to me I'm drifting into a polemic, not a novel. It is a good story. There is a love story in it. There's lots of drama. It's a good deal of it is set south of the border. It is painful for me to watch, since I said much of it at Harvard, the agony that's going on in the higher education system in the US, particularly in some of the stronger universities and colleges under a lot of assault from the government of the day. But I think after 350 years and with $53 billion in the endowment, they'll probably outlast the current president, but it's just a guess. And I think with that, I do want to thank Daniel and McNally Robinson. This is the third book I've launched in this store and in this room, and the second novel. And it's always nice to come home and look around a room and see friends and family and colleagues, and you know, it makes all those lonely days of sitting in a room trying to write with these characters roaming around, it makes it worthwhile to be able to share it. And I would be delighted to take any questions that you might have. I should throw in a thank you to my publisher in case they're online, in case I want to publish with them again. They were wonderful to work with. They're Seattle-based, and they have the lovely name of Girl Friday Productions. And I was very nervous about approaching them because I looked at them on the website, and I thought, you know, I'm an older male author. But as it turned out, in the small worldishness of good things, the person who had been my publicist on Shadow Life recommended me to them. She knew them well and did work with them, and they were very pleased to move ahead with the publication. So I'm going to learn what it's like working with an American publisher. This all happened, I should say, before tariffs. And that was an unwelcome surprise when instead of $25, this book was looking like $47. And my publisher said, "What's the problem with that?" I said, "Even my family in Winnipeg won't pay $47 for a paperback." So I'm relieved that, you know, maybe some of you would, but I'm relieved that the tariffs did not come on books for all sorts of bigger reasons than my own small endeavor. But let me pause or stop there, and if there are questions, I'd be delighted. And we have a microphone, I think.
We do, yeah.
I'm wondering if the guilt that Matt felt from the mistrial in the first book plays into how he deals with the circumstances in this book.
I think that his departure from the city, and there's a scene with his psychologist in the Fulcrum. It's a pretty complete break. He leaves his job of many years and his public service career, first on a health leave after the trauma of the trial. And then he just goes back and he really can't deal with it anymore. He's not calm enough. And so he sets out to reconnect with Mary Louise at Harvard in Boston. That's the trip he's on when he's talking to the city manager. I think there is a motivation. He feels somewhat defeated by events. And so he goes back to school, and he focuses on the issues that I've been going on about. And I think there is a motivation there, a desire to feel useful again, a desire to do something, useful in the world, which had been a main motivation of him, of his character, until he ran into the consequences of the trial and that. So yes, both guilt and a passion for public service, I think, play into that mix.
I think you said there were 3 streams, and you told us about the romance and the climate.
What was the third stream? Is that the question?
That's the question.
Let me go back in my notes and see why I was sure there were 3 streams. Well, I think the way I had them in the notes and then ignored them when I got up here. One stream was clearly climate change and that big challenge. A second stream was the sort of example of Manitoba and the idea that part of this, not certainly all of it, would require us to learn from lessons and to re-engineer the environments in which we live, which may be, rather than a full stream, a subset of the climate change stream. And then the third was simply to tell an entertaining story and to see where the characters that had arrived in Shadow Life would go if you gave them some running room and a challenge. And there's a good deal of that. And I'm particularly pleased that in the Fulcrum, Mary Louise develops into a very powerful character. She had a small role in Shadow Life, and also the professor who was briefly in Shadow Life. That's where Matthew finds out about his birth mother. She plays a much bigger role in the Fulcrum, so all of that. And I was back at Harvard for my 50th reunion, which was a bit terrifying. I got a call from someone saying, "Oh, it's your class reunion and it's your 50th class reunion." I said, "That can't possibly be possible. And I think it must be 40. And the nice young woman said, "A large number of your colleagues feel the same way, but actually, I think if you look at dates, you'll find that it is your 50th. So I went, and it was an interesting experience to be there. This was prior to the change in US government, and the surprise guest at the event, which they didn't announce. It was on the program, the 3-day program is to be announced. And at midnight on the Wednesday night, an email came saying at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, the surprise guest is your classmate, Merrick Garland, who at that point was Attorney General of the United States. And there was a lot of security the next morning. And he gave a wonderful onstage interview. Probably he's less known to you than the person who interviewed him, Lawrence O'Donnell, who's on MSNBC and who had been his roommate at college. So what was wonderful about the interview was he wouldn't let him get away with anything. So he described his day and all the briefings on all the horrible things going on in the world that the US Attorney General is briefed on hour by hour. And then he said, what do you do to, relieve the tension? What do you do to, escape from the pressure of your job? And he said, well, when I get home in the evening, we're near a park, and my wife and I go for a walk in the park. And that sounded so lovely. And then O'Donnell waited just long enough and said, and how big's the security detachment when you go for your walk? And Merrick Garland said 8 armed personnel. So you sort of think, well, that's not that relaxing. But anyway, I'm creating another whole stream here. But yeah, that's basically the convergent themes. So, anyone else?
Yeah, we have time for another question if anyone has one. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Do you have any final closing words?
Well, other than to thank you for coming and say there's some danger that I might keep writing. And just to say I'm enjoying the process of fiction, and I hope I'm getting better at it. That would be the thing. I found in the Fulcrum many of the things that editors pointed out to me in Shadow Life I internalized. So the first draft was a good deal better than it would have been other than that. And so it's nice to be, I don't want to say at my age, but nice to be getting better at something, because there are other things that I'm pretty sure I'm not getting better at. But there's others in the room who would know better than I about skiing as an example of whether it's getting better or just clinging to one's previous level. And I think that's probably where I should stop. And then I'm aware of the Oilers game this evening and deeply grateful, not in a negative way. I know if it had been the Jets, we'd have simply postponed the event because nobody would be here. I'm sorry the Jets aren't the people playing tonight, but I guess one has to get behind the Oilers as the remaining Canadian team and hope that they will, no offense to Paul Maurice, who's doing a swell job of coaching the Americans, but anyway, stop there.
Lovely. So thank you again to Michael Decter and all of you for joining us today, both here and online. We are going to move to the signing portion of the evening, so please feel free to approach the signing table here to my right. You can do so before purchasing a copy. Just make sure to purchase one before you leave. We do appreciate that. And I can speak for all of us that we are very excited for the next one, Michael. Thank you once again to you. Have a good night, everyone.